Well, we've come to the end of our message series for this pastoral year. We'll be taking those up again. The weekend after Labor Day, I believe, is the first series of the new pastoral year, because in Canada we have two New Years, one in January and one in September. That's kind of just the way that it is. So we're done with message series for the time being, but interestingly enough, the church herself gives us kind of a series, this year at least, for this month of July, the end of the month of July and of August, because as most of you might know, over the course of 3 years we listened to 3 of the 4 Gospels at Sunday Mass. So one year we listened almost exclusively to Matthew, another year to Mark, another year to Luke, and this is the year of Mark. But Mark's Gospel is a little bit shorter than the other Gospels, and so we come to this time of the year in the summer months, where in other years Matthew and Luke would just continue on. And what do? Well, the church gives us, to fill in this space, excerpts from the Gospel of John, and very particular special excerpts they are, because as you may know, John's Gospel does not include within his story of the Last Supper what we call the words of institution, Jesus saying, "Take, eat, this is my body, this is the chalice of my blood." He has many other things that he shares that Jesus said at the Last Supper, but he doesn't share that as the other 3 Gospels do. And so what the church does is she takes instead for this period of time readings from the 6th chapter of John's Gospel. It's known in the church, in the specialized language of the church, as the Bread of Life Discourse, because Jesus is involved in this chapter in a dialogue, really in a debate with the teachers of the Jewish faith. And he's telling them and teaching them, and us as well, he says, my body is true food, and my blood is true drink. If you don't eat my body and drink my blood, you have no life within you. It's called the Bread of Life Discourse. And so the church gives us readings from that chapter over the course of the next few weeks. And so there'll be kind of a theme, at least in the Gospels, if not in the messages. And we begin that process today. As you know, the Gospel reading was the story of the feeding of the 5,000, and we select the Old Testament reading to connect with the Gospel, and so we heard a similar story in our reading from the book of Kings about the prophet Elisha. And those readings together, I think we could say, give us a portrait, paint a picture of 2 worlds, and a world of scarcity and a world of abundance. A world where there just isn't enough to go around, and a world full of God's abundant gifts. As Christians, we know which world we believe in, right? Of course, it's the world of abundance. A world where all needs are met, and the world where, as we heard in the psalm, God opens his hand to satisfy the desire of every living thing. We believe in that world. We believe in the world of the Gospel we heard today, the world where the 5,000 are fed. It's a world in which everyone receives as much food as they want, and there are still 12 baskets left over. That's the world we believe in, or at least the world we want to believe in. We know we should believe in. The challenge for us and for our faith is that the world of abundance, the world of today's gospel, doesn't really seem to be the world in which we live. Now, we believe in God, and we believe in that promise of abundance as best we are able. But the truth is that when we look at the world around us, we don't necessarily see ourselves living in a world of abundance. And so it's hard to believe that the gospel we heard today has much to say to us except, well, God will provide someday, somehow, in some way that we really don't understand, and which we really don't want to think about very much because if we do, it might turn out not to be true. After all, considering disease, drought, famine, war, poverty, not to mention pandemic, it's pretty clear that there are many people who don't have everything they need, let alone everything they desire. So how can we say that God opens his hand to satisfy the desire of every living creature? We know there just isn't enough to go around. Now, I talked about 2 worlds, and those 2 worlds have their own logic. And what I just said to you is the logic of scarcity. The logic of scarcity is the logic of the world in which we spend most of our time, the everyday world. The problem is That logic is not just the logic of the world around us, it can very easily become our logic, our way of thinking as well, yours and mine. Like Philip then, we listen to Jesus tell us to feed the 5,000 and we say, well, there's just no way we can make this work. It can't be done. Just consider some examples, questions about our world and ourselves. If I ask you, are there enough good jobs for everyone in Canada? Good jobs. Well, the answer would be no, and there really has not been in living memory, so we would say. Jobs are scarce. Let's try something a little bit more challenging, a little bit perhaps closer to home. Can you afford to give twice as much of yourself to your parish or to your community as you now do? Twice as much of your time, your energy, twice as much of your financial resources? The answer would be no. Have you looked at my calendar? Have you seen the way I spend my week? I'm going from here, I'm running from here, running there. I'm always busy. Time is precious. There's not enough of it. Money is scarce. Have you looked at my bank account at the end of the month? There's nothing there. Money is scarce. There's not enough of it. That is our world. That, if we're honest, sometimes is our life. And that is the logic of scarcity. Now, as logic, it's impeccable. There's no flaw in the logic. But the truth is that every logic, every way of looking at the world, every argument is based, whether we know it or not, on certain assumptions, certain foundations. Just as we can't have a conversation while floating in midair, neither can we make an argument or have an understanding of the world without standing somewhere. And the place where we stand that determines the way we look at the world, the place where we stand is on our assumptions, on that logic of which I speak. And too often, our most basic assumption is of scarcity. Like Philip, our assumption is that there's just not enough. Not enough jobs, not enough money in my bank account, not enough of these 2 loaves and 5 fishes. That's our assumption. That's the foundation of our reasoning and logic when it comes to the world. But what if we are wrong? Well, of course, we want to believe that we're wrong. We want to believe that we live in a world of abundance, in God's world. And we probably do even believe that God opens his hand to the world. It's just difficult for us to see it happening as we look around us at our world, or maybe even in our own life. Well, one of the best ways for us to see it happening is to make it happen. The world and everything in it, after all, belong to God. And so if we, who belong to God, open our hands to the world, his hand is open as well. So what might that look like? Well, I've already pointed in the direction that we might look. Take, for example, about the gift of yourself, materially and in terms of your time and energy. Take a look at the last tax return you filed and look at the line that records the total of your charitable donations, the deduction that you got for giving to the parish and other charities in the community. Take a look at that number, compare it to your income, and then maybe consider doubling that number. Live with it then for a year, because you're probably afraid, I was. Live with it for a year and see whether at the end of that year your life isn't just as rich, I would say quite probably even more rich than it was before. That's one thing. But there's more, and probably more fundamental. Consider your time. Time is something we know from experience is scarce. There is never enough of it. Take the amount of time and energy you already give to service in one way or another. Maybe it's to the parish, maybe it's to the wider community, and double it. Live with that for a year and see if your life isn't richer as a result. Or take the amount of time you spend on prayer through the course of the week and double it. If you're not really praying day to day, well, maybe begin. There was famous advice given to that effect by the late Bishop Fulton J. Sheen he was speaking with a priest, and the priest was saying, well, he was saying the same thing that the rest of us say. He was saying, my life as a priest in the parish is very busy. I'm running this way, I'm running that way. I just don't have time, Bishop, to do what you told me to do. I don't have time to have a daily holy hour of prayer. I just don't have the time. And the bishop said to him, if you don't have time for a holy hour, that means you need 2 holy hours. Now there is the logic of abundance. And we need that logic. We need that way of thinking. We need that assumption. We need that to live that logic in our own lives. There is an old saying that if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem begins to look like a nail. Well, if the only way you have to look at the world and your life is the logic of scarcity, every problem begins to look like the only possible way to solve it is by working hard to get what you need and then defending what you've got against all comers, whether it's your time or your material possessions or whatever it might be. But if we begin to live out the logic of abundance, if we begin to act, not just think or believe, as I'm sure we all do, but also to act as if our time, our talent, and our treasure are a gift received from the one whose gifts can never be exhausted, whose gifts are always renewed. If we begin to live that way, then the world begins to look different. It begins to look like what it is, God's free gift. And that's the key. The logic of abundance is a logic, but truth be told, it is a countercultural logic. It's a logic that cuts against the grain of the world in which we live, and maybe even against the grain of our own life. Jesus knew that. He said to his disciples, "You have received without cost. Now give without cost." That's the logic of abundance. It's also, interestingly for our parish and our mission and goals, it's also the logic of evangelization. It's also the logic of sharing faith. Because as we begin to trust, and so then to freely give what we have been freely given, we begin to look different to others in our relationships with them. They see someone different from the rest of the world. We begin to look like a mysterious, attractive new world present in our own person. We begin to look like God's gift to them. And just maybe, as they see the logic of abundance in our life and in us, they will begin to see the world the same way. And they will desire to live out of that same logic, to stand on those same assumptions themselves. Now, I would like to tell you that all of this is in our power, and in one way it is, but that would not be the whole truth. And we know it from our own struggles as disciples of Jesus Christ. Because the logic of abundance, those foundational assumptions that I'm talking about, that's God's logic. And it was given to us in Jesus Christ. Without him, and without his grace, that is, without the free gift of himself to us, without that, without his presence in our world and in our lives, we will never be able to escape the logic of scarcity, no matter how hard we try, no matter how hard we work. You can accomplish a lot through work, but this is one thing that you can't. There will never be, without Jesus Christ, there will never be enough jobs, there will never be enough time, there will never be enough money or material possessions. Life is short, and then you die. That's the logic of scarcity. That's the logic in which we are educated and formed by the culture around us. Life is short, and then you die. But fortunately, there is a place where we can encounter the logic of abundance, and it is right here at the Eucharist, at the Mass. Think about it. Here we bring the Lord bread and wine. We give freely as we have been given to. We give them freely. And then what? We receive them back transformed, multiplied, magnified in their reality and in their power in our life. That's what the Mass is. We are here today to participate in a miracle of abundance. If we let it, the power of Christ's saving death and resurrection enters our life in this celebration, and then, like a stream of living water, it flows out to transform the world of which we are part. And that happens in each and every one of us if we are open and if we allow it to, and at each and every celebration of the Mass. Power. It's the power to feed the 5,000, the power to transform our life and our relationships, the power to defeat in our life and in our world the logic of scarcity, the power to help us enter into God's logic, the power of Jesus Christ.